Hi guys, Grandjay here and welcome to another one of our videos. Today we'll be talking about the ice cards of Opus 5. So let's get started. First of all, we have Lougay, which is a 4-cost monster. For 1 ice, until the end of the turn, Lougay becomes a 4 with 8,000 power. When Lougay deals damage to your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. You can only use this ability once per turn. So, the best card for this to really sort of compare with is Genesis. So they both got a very similar sort of powered body, and yeah, when they deal damage to your opponent directly, then your opponent discards a card from their hand. But this is on a 4-cost monster, and it does seem like this set is really pushing a lot of these sort of like higher costed monsters. The big problem with this card is that it is a 4-cost monster, which means it is vulnerable to certain removal abilities. So the monster removal that we see probably the most often is the lightning monster dragon that can hit monsters that cost 4 or less, so Lougay is a target to that. But besides from that, there doesn't seem to be too many other cards that sort of deal with 4-cost monsters, besides from Wynn having Alexander, I believe. So yeah, so Lougay generally will be pretty safe. However, when he does become a forward, 8,000 power body, that does leave it open to certain removal abilities. But outside of lightning and outside of fire, there's not too many instant speed abilities that can kill this monster off when it does become a forward. So this card is actually not bad, but it does have a 4 CP forward upfront cost that can't block or attack, and it does require 1 ice to attack every turn or subsequently block. But yeah, this card actually just constantly threatens your opponent, forcing him to always have a forward available for you, to prevent you from attacking them directly and making you discard a card. That being said though, this card would probably only really see play in certain more mono icy sort of builds, because ice lightning definitely is one of those archetypes that is well documented, that has had a lot of success, and in those sort of decks they do have red mage available. So in general, playing a Genesis or playing a lock and then red maging it for haste will allow them to sort of attack through and to deal that damage. So this card is not a bad card. Definitely does seem like a solid control piece, but yeah, definitely seems more like a sort of more slower ice sort of base deck, which definitely does seem to be something that they are pushing more for ice this set. Next we have Vena. It is a 3-cost forward at 6,000 power, EX burst. When Vena enters the field, you may search your deck for 1 card named Laza and add it to your hand. So this set does bring with it a new Laza in form of the new starter deck Laza. Yeah, being a 3-cost forward at 6,000 power, in effect you're basically kind of getting a 1 CP forward, because you are sort of getting a card back when you play this card. So if you do discount the fact that he does get your card back, he does effectively become a 1 CP 6,000 power forward, which is pretty solid, and he's got EX burst. So on paper, this card has actually a pretty decent amount of value, and considering how we have a new Laza that's actually pretty solid, that's a backup, this card can potentially see play. The worst thing about this card is the fact that it is named Vena, which means that decks you won't be able to have this Vena out on the field while you're playing the 4-cost Vena, and vice versa. And considering how in this metagame there does seem to be quite a few powerful forwards that are around that 5 or plus mark, definitely feels like the new, the old Opus 2 Vena will probably have more of a place in the metagame than this Vena. But otherwise, this card's solid. If you do sort of forego the other 4-cost Vena, then this card is a pretty solid add if you're playing if you're playing an ice water deck with Laza. Next we have Une. I spoke about this in one of our earlier spoilers. This card is bad, don't play her. 4-cost forward, 7,000 power, but she comes in dull. She does prevent one of your opponent's forwards from reactivating. But yeah, if that forward is ever removed, and Une still stays dull, so she effectively becomes pretty useless. So yeah, don't ever play her. You'd much rather just dull and freeze something, or just play something like Genesis to dull and freeze. There are much better options that Ice has available to it. Do not play this card. Next we have Keenest. Is a 2-cost backup for Ice 1, tap, select 1 number, all forwards of that cost cannot attack this turn. So that's yeah, very similar to what we have from Opus 1's Time Age. You are paying 1 extra, but you can potentially block more than 1 attack with this card. So that's the pros and cons of this card. Do note that you select the number on resolution, so your opponent never really knows what you're going to be using to prevent their attacks for the turn until this card resolves, and your opponent can't really do anything until after it resolves. In addition, it also doesn't choose any forwards, so certain forwards that can't be chosen by abilities, they can be prevented from attacking with Keenest. So definitely in a more sort of controlier, sort of stolier sort of ice build, I could potentially see this card being played potentially as like a 1/1 with this and Time Age, or 1, 2, depending on your numbers. This card's actually not bad. Yeah, would be interested in trying it out. Next, we got Orphan, which is one of the legendaries for Ice this set, and this card is actually very, very good. It's a 6-cost forward at 9,000 power, so it's a little bit overcosted, but when it enters the field, choose 2 forwards your opponent controls, dull them. If you control 5 or more forward, 5 or more Ice characters, freeze them also. So pretty much this card definitely does fit into a mono Ice archetype, and mono Ice definitely has like pretty much most of the tools that it needs to deal with most problems. So yeah, so being mono Ice actually doesn't hinder the deck too much. And yeah, coming into play, dulling and freezing 2 guys is pretty solid. If you control 5 or more Ice characters, so that's pretty much, if you have 4 backups, and when you play this card, that will fulfill the requirements. And generally, yeah, with 6 cost forward, you generally want to have four backups down. So yeah, this the trigger to freeze them actually isn't too difficult to pull off as well. But also when Orphan attacks, choose 1 forward opponent controls and freeze it. And so yeah, this is a sort of definitely a very strong control piece, a very strong tempo piece. If you put this down, and your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with it straight away, then this guy is going to keep one of your opponent's forwards locked down. And considering that you've basically dull and frozen one of your guys as soon as he comes into play, he's almost always going to have a target to freeze every turn when he attacks. And being a 9,000 power body, he's pretty solid, very difficult to remove, and generally going to be able to outfight a lot of forwards. So this is going to be like the new endgame piece for Ice decks. Yeah, if they're up against like say like certain Earth decks that have like stronger power forwards, or like effects that prevent them from being dulled, yeah, Orphan gives you a strong forward that allows you to just sort of push through while also locking down some of their other forwards that can't be protected. Next, we have Scala. It is a 2-cost backup for Ice, Dull, Break, Scholar. Choose 1 Ice forward of cost 3 or less from your break zone, add it to your hand. So so this acts very like similarly to what Devout does from Opus 1, in that it does allow you to recur cards from your break zone. However, this card is limited to Ice forwards, so and Ice forwards of cost 3 or less, which does limit the scope of this card a lot. I don't personally think that they needed to limit it to Ice forwards. Just like forwards of cost 3 or less would have been fine. Yeah. That being said, though, this card does have some does limit the scope a lot, considering Ice has a lot of fantastic 4-cost forwards, but there are like just significantly less good 3 or less forwards. There definitely are good 3-cost forwards, such as Locke, such as potentially Sarah as well. But yeah, locking it down to just Ice forwards is actually pretty limiting. It is a 2-cost backup, so you can put it down early. Ice does have certain weaknesses in that, like they don't have too many 2-cost backups that they can put in early that have a relevant ability later on. Yeah, a lot of Ice decks really dislike when they have to play a Jewel Nabar down early and they don't have any sort of targets to freeze with it. So Scholar is actually not a bad way for Ice decks to sort of get the ball rolling, put a backup down, and later on it can be broken to clear up backup space if you do need to play more backups. And it does allow you to recur stuff such as Lock, which is a pretty fantastic card. Next, we have Edward. So Edward is a 3-cost backup. When Edward enters the field, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So effectively, because this backup doesn't draw your card, but the fact that it discards 1 card for your opponent kind of makes it like a pseudo 1 CP backup, in the sense that you and your opponent both kind of go down 1 card. So that's kind of one way to view it. Also, yeah, I do believe it gets a discount from that from that Opus 2 card, Harley, I believe, which makes it a 2 CP backup, which is fine. Its S ability is S dull, choose 1 summon, cancel its ability or cancel its effect. So the best analogy, or the best sort of contrast to this card is 3-cost summoner that we had from Opus 1, which is Ice, put someone into break zone, choose 1 summon, cancel its effect. So the benefit of Edward is that you don't have to break this backup in order to use its ability, so you can like use it later on again, but you have to keep this backup active, whereas Summoner doesn't have to hold itself active. So those are the pros and cons. Plus, Edward has to also discard a copy of itself, which really limits its scope, because you don't have too many other Edwards that are too useful by themselves. So that really limits the scope of Edward. Although potentially I could see like an Ice deck that runs like two of this Edward and 2 of the discard Edward, and then depending on which matchup, you can sort of chop and change and discard which one you would like. And since they both have S abilities, you do have some flexibility there. So that's an interesting way to pivot this card. But in terms of like a more competitive play, I think that this deck is a little bit too costly for its ability. And generally, if you want to just negate a summon, you much rather err on the side of Summoner. And so yeah, so in terms of its ability to cancel summons, I'm not a particularly big fan, and making you and your opponent discard a card, like there are other ways to make that happen in Ice. Next is Glossy Allah. I've talked about this a little bit from an earlier spoiler. Yeah, you get to choose 2 of the following actions. This is a defensive summon and allows you to basically deal with 2 attacks, or basically allows you to deal with 1 attack and discard 1 card from your opponent's hand. So this card's actually like not bad, but it is a defensive card. It's generally much better on defense than it is on offense. So yeah, so if you are playing a sort of speedier, more tempo-ier ice deck, then definitely Shiva's probably going to be the way to go. But if you're playing a more defensive, like more control-ier version, then this potentially does have its place if you're not running the two cost Shiva that buffs itself from other Shivas. But yeah, considering how like Ice got a couple of powerful summons this set, hint hint, this might be a potential route to go if you're not going the 2 cost Shiva build. Next, we have Gumbo, and again, this is another card that's been spoiled. When Gumbo is put from the field into the break zone, you may search for 1 card named Gumbo and place it on the field dull. This is the only Gumbo in the set or in the game at all right now. So basically, it's a backup that replaces itself when it gets blown up. This is generally only useful from ability, like in conjunction with abilities that blow up your own backups or characters. Outside that, it's a very niche ability, and this backup inherently has no value by itself as well. Your opponent is never going to spend resources to blow up this backup. So yeah, so I don't think this card is going to see really any play. There's really sort of no need. Next is Jesper. It is a 2 cost monster. Tap. Each player discards 1 card from his or her hand. You can only use this ability during your turn. Now, I am actually a pretty big fan of this card. So it's its ability that makes you and your opponent discard, which means inherently you're not getting any value, but there are some interesting things you can do with this card. So first of all, like in certain situations, there are cards such as CID Rains where they gain an additional ability when your opponent has no cards in hand. So if you do play CID Rains and your opponent has 1 card in hand, the effect goes on stack, and then you can use Jesper to like discard the last card from your opponent's hand, and then allows you to be able to trigger their ability. So it is a effectively 0 CP way to like discard cards from hand, even though it's discarding cards from your hand. Now, where this card really shines is if you have no cards in hand and your opponent has at least 1 card in hand, Jesper is going to be really strong. So especially in any sort of like more aggressive sort of ice deck, where you're discarding your entire hand to put down like backups to put down forwards, this card's going to be really strong. And considering how monsters don't have summoning sickness, they can use their like dull ability straight away. So in that regard, Jesper actually is pretty strong because you can like just dump a whole bunch of cards, play all your stuff down, have no cards in hand, use Jesper's ability, make your opponent discard a card from your hand. And because it's a monster, it's very difficult to remove. And like over the course of the game, if you're able to get your hand down to nothing and then keep using Jesper, Jesper is just going to like by itself take 2 to like 5 cards from your opponent's hand, and that's a lot of value this card's going to like single-handedly take. If you do manage to get 2 down, because this card you can have multiple copies on the field in any sort of situation where you got 0 cards in hand, you got like 2 or 3 of these guys, bang bang bang, your opponent's got like no cards in hand now. So this card seems pretty cool. Definitely like it's very much stronger if you have no cards in hand. But yeah, if you are playing a strategy where you can like survive on no cards in hand, this card is just going to give you significant amounts of value. Really interested to try them out. Next is Conjurer. It is a 3 cost backup. When Conjurer enters the field, choose 1 drop stand unit in your break zone and add it to your hand. So best card to sort of like really compare this to is the 4 cost lightning backup from Opus 1, Sage, which allows you to return any character back from your break zone to your hand. Conjurer costs 1 less, but it is limited to drop standard units. So yeah, it does say standard units, but it doesn't specify forwards or backups. So you can get forwards or backups with this card. So that is something to note for Conjurer. So it costs 1 less, but the scope is a little bit more narrow, and it is in Ice as well. So Ice actually has quite a lot of like recursion type abilities. And now, like this set, it really seems to be like pushing forward Ice's recursion ability. Because it is limited to standard units, I don't think there are actually any standard units that use S abilities. So you're not really going to be using it to power any S abilities. But yeah, for like a standard unit deck, potentially those DGS soldiers, potentially this might be a good way to sort of play into that sort of strategy. Ice does have reasonable stand unit support in like the DGS soldier and the DGS line as well. So yeah, so Conjurer like may see play in those sort of like more fun nichier sort of decks. Next, we have one of the first legend. The first legend for Ice this set is the Emperor. It is a 3 cost 7,000 power forward, so it's on curve, but When Emperor enters the field, you may pay 1. If you do, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. When your opponent draws a card outside his or her draw phase, choose one forward your opponent controls, dull it, and freeze it. So, yeah, we've spoken a little bit about this from our earlier spoilers. Yeah, so I think it is on curve, but you have to pay that 1 extra to make your opponent discard, which, yes, technically is a CP advantage for you. But even then, like, it's not a game-breaking sort of ability, right? And in a lot of cases, you'd much rather play Lock, even though you have to jump through more hoops to trigger Lock's ability. Yeah, it does seem like a better play on Emperor just as a come into play discard ability. The ability where if your opponent draws a card, dull and freeze a guy. In a lot of cases, this is not going to be a relevant ability. A lot of cards now, they search for cards from your deck. A lot of EX bursts outside of water don't draw you cards, they search for cards. And yeah, searching your deck for a card does not trigger this ability. If it did specify draw a card or search your deck for a card, then definitely I would definitely rate this card much higher. But this card's ability is a little bit too niche and seems to only be relevant in water decks. Yes, not to say that it can't be used against other colors such as like fire with Matthias or wind with like Echo or like a couple of those other new draw cards. That being said, though, yeah, Emperor's ability is a little bit too niche, and I don't think it really sort of deals with problems that that Ice really has, which is guys that can't be dull and frozen, yeah, or guys that can't be chosen by abilities. Yeah, and do note, they have clarified this, that this does trigger for each card that your opponent draws outside the draw phase. So if your opponent has a card that does draw them 2 cards, let's say Moogle or Poo Poo or something, and they draw 2 cards outside the draw phase, then yeah, this does trigger twice. So you get to dull and freeze 2 guys, or dull and freeze the same guy twice if you want. But yeah, so outside that, this card is not a bad card, but it does not impress me. Talking about cards that impress me though, CID. It is a 5-cost 9,000 power forward. When CID is dealt damage by a character, that character's controller discards 1 card from his or her hand. So do note, damage by a character and that character's controller, right? So you can't just use ways to ping this with your own guy to make your opponent discard cards. In fact, that'd actually be terrible because every time you ping it with one of your own abilities, you discard cards. So obviously, it seems like this card is going to be one of those abilities that punishes your opponent for any sort of using any sort of spread type abilities, spread damage type abilities, or any sort of or just being in combat with CID. Also, CID's got a secondary ability of pay 1 ice. CID gets plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. And yeah, this seems actually pretty solid as a forward. Definitely builds into sort of the ice discard type strategy. The best analogy, I think, this is very similar to Capricious Reaper. So whenever he's chosen by one of your opponent's summons or abilities, then they discard a card. This is like every time he receives damage, which can be in combat or from just like card abilities themselves. There are a lot, like surprising amount of like card abilities that do deal spread amount of spreaded damage. So yeah, it can cause your opponent to discard like cards randomly. And if your opponent does want to block this, yeah, it's very inefficient for your opponent to chump block it by throwing like a 4k or 5k or 6k in front of him. Also, the ability for just paying 1 ice to give him plus 1,000 power is actually pretty solid in itself, especially towards the mid to late game when you don't have like too many cards and you don't want to commit more forwards to the field and you have plenty of ice backups. You can just send him in and your opponent's going to find it very difficult to sort of combat him. So this card's pretty solid. So ultimately now ice is just like it's just really up to ice to determine what sort of endgame finish do they want. Do they want something like CID or do they want something like Orphan? But CID is actually pretty solid, and just as a rare, everyone will have access to him. So yeah, if you are if you're unable to pick up Orphans, I think CID is actually a pretty solid card as a sort of as an ice sort of pusher in the late game. So very impressed with this card, and I'm definitely going to be interested in chucking him into some of my ice decks. Next, we have Arithmetician. It's a 3-cost forward at 7,000 power, and it's really cool that a lot of these classes that we used to see like being relegated to purely backups, some of these like more non-combatant type cards are starting to see forward play. So Arithmetician is a forward at 7,000 power. Dull, select one number, dull all forwards of that cost. You can only use this ability during your turn. So this ability isn't like, yeah, this ability can't really be used on defense because yeah, you can't really do it on your opponent's turn. So yeah, it's a way to clear through your opponent's defense so you can attack through, or to allow you to trigger off freeze abilities or like that sort of stuff. Being on a forward actually makes it a little bit more difficult to use because yeah, being on a backup, they have a little bit more survivability and you can sort of choose when to use it. This, you have to commit a forward to the field. So yeah, not super impressed. And also it does all forwards at that cost, so that includes yours as well. So yeah, it does have, like, there is potential for it to backfire as well. So I think that the scope of this card is a little bit too niche, although definitely I can see in certain matchups, such as like water matchups, where they have a lot of 3s or a lot of 5s, that this card is just going to lock them, well, it's going to like give them a lot of trouble. But that being said, like, water has plenty of ways to reactivate, including the bad Astrologian. I don't know if you guys have been following that on Facebook. But yeah, yeah, so I don't really think this card's going to see much play. There are better cards around that 3 slot mark as well. But yeah, if Ice does want to push a more like standard unit type sort of deck, this actually might not be a too bad like card to sort of like put into the deck. Next, we have CID Rains. We've talked about this a little bit earlier from one of our earlier spoilers. It's a 4-cost EX burst backup. When it enters the field, choose one dull forward your opponent controls, deal it 7,000 damage. The best way I sort of analogize is that it's like Seymour, in that, yeah, when it comes into play, it deals effectively with a 3-cost forward, because yeah, in this case, it's a dull forward 7k damage. So there are some pros and cons. Yes, it can hit things at a higher cost than 3, but yeah, it has to deal 7,000 damage and it has to deal a dull forward. But on the plus side, it does have EX burst. So yeah, this card definitely does have potential to see play in Ice decks, because Ice doesn't have too many quality EX bursts, so this is like not a bad one to chuck in. But you don't get to play the other 2-cost CID Rains, which is a pretty fun card. So yeah, so those are the pros and cons. I might try him out, and potentially he might be like surprisingly better than you may think. As an EX burst, he's usually going to be able to trigger and do something. But yeah, this is going to be one of those cards that you might want to try out. So I'm a little bit on the fence with this card at the moment. Next is Firma Church. It is a standard unit, 2-cost 1,000 power forward. When Firma Church enters the field, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. If your opponent has 2 or less cards in their hand, Firma Church gets plus 4,000 power. So this card is very similar. It's kind of like a combination of Argath and a combination of Zidane, in the sense that like it is a 2-cost card that forces your opponent to discard a card from their hand. So if you're paying 2 CP, put this card down, your opponent's like discarding 1 card, which is effectively 2 CP as well. In that regard, it's basically like an even costed card in the sense that like it costs you 2 CP and it costs your opponent 2 CP, and you get a guy onto the field. So in that regard, this card like is an even cost to put a guy on the field. That being said, 1,000 power is pretty small. There's so many ping effects, especially against fire, that like fire or wind, that just like straight up just 1k easy for like 1 or 2 CP. Yeah, so this card in terms of that, yeah, body is pretty crap if you compare it to Argath, which is like 3k, which means your opponent actually has to have certain very specific answers to deal like a cheap 3k, such as like Rig DL or that sort of stuff. But yeah, 1k, this guy's going to instantly die from anything. But if your opponent has 2 or less cards in their hand, he does get plus 4,000 power, which puts him up to 5,000 power, which puts him on curve for a 2-cost forward. So that's the benefit of him compared to like Argath, in that he can get a little bit bigger, in that he can get up to 5,000 power, and he's a standard unit, so you can play multiple copies of him. So there have been times where I've played like a more aggressive Ice discard deck, and when you play Argath and you draw additional Argaths on into your hand, you feel bad because you can't play more Argaths to discard your opponent's hand, because they are unique characters. So that does have its benefit. That being said, potentially this card might actually replace Argath, simply because you can play multiple copies of them on the field. So in like a more aggressive Ice deck, especially because he's a standard unit as well, there is some degree of support with him. Yeah, so potentially like this card will actually see play if you're playing a more aggressive Ice deck that's also got like discardability as well. And especially if we go back to like that Jesper card, that can just like really sort of blow your opponent's hand, like from like really discard your opponent's hand. This card is going to synergize with that pretty solidly as well. Next we have Snow. So Snow is a 4-cost forward at 7,000 power, but it besides from it being below the curve, when Snow enters the field, you may pay X. If you do, search for 1 card named Lightning or cost X and play it onto the field. So you're not getting a discount on the Lightning, but you are effectively getting the Lightning card, right? So that kind of like justifies why Snow is under curve, because in effect you're playing the Snow and like you get to search for the Lightning card. So that's kind of 2 CP within itself, because if you were to place Lightning, you would have to pay its cost and have the card. So it's like Lightning's cost plus 2 CP, right? So in that regard, Snow kind of like pseudo searches for a Lightning, and puts it on the field for cost, on cost, right? So that kind of justifies Snow's slightly above curveness. That being said, though, I think even at 3 cost, this card would have been fair. Yeah, free cost this card would have been fair. I don't think they need to put out 4, even though mathematically, because you're getting a 2 CP discount on the lightning, and if you deduct that off the snow, then it's like, yeah, it becomes like a 2 cost 7,000 power that allows you to like play a snow from your play a lightning from your deck. So yeah, but that being said, it is a lot to pay. So if you are paying 4 CP for the snow and you need to pay like at least you want to be paying 4 CP and getting the 4 cost lightning, or 5 cost lightning. In that sort of situation, you're paying like 8 or 9 CP. That's a lot to pay in one turn, and that means you're discarding a lot of cards. And I think that's what's really going to like hold this snow back. Yeah, it's because like, yeah, he's just a little bit overcosted. And while he does give you value, you have to pay all that value. You have to pay that entire cost in one turn. But yeah, so even though he can like toolbox and search you for the lightning that you want, yeah, it's an expensive way to do it. And yeah, because of that, I don't really think this card's going to see much play. It will be fun to play in like an Ice Lightning Final Fantasy 13 deck if that's something that interests you. But besides from that, I do not think this card's like really going to see all that much play. Next, we have Trickster. It is a free cost forward, 7,000 power. Trickster does not receive any damage from forwards of haste or first strike. Now, this is a card that really sort of screams sideboard, right? Because Final Fantasy doesn't have a sideboard in the game, niche cards like this that have like good effects against specific matchups, say lightning that has a lot of haste or fire that has a lot of first strike, this would be like really cool or really fun to have in those sort of matchups. But because the game doesn't really use a sideboard system, cards like this that would be good in certain matchups just won't really see much play because of their niche abilities, and them being otherwise pretty useless in most other sort of matchups. So like against water, this is like pretty much useless, and like against earth, pretty much useless again. So yeah, because of its like sort of narrow usage, I don't think this card is going to see any sort of competitive play. But yeah, if you got like people in your local meta that are just like wrecking your crap with haste dudes or first strike dudes, then Trickster is like a fun gimmicky way to sort of deal with them. If you want to play like a more standard unit sort of deck, especially in Ice, because yeah, there's so many good standard units in Ice, definitely you can just like play this guy as just like 1 or 2 of, like you can search him out or recur him in certain matchups where he is useful. So yeah, that isn't to say that no deck can't use him, no deck can use him. Standard units and the standard unit support will be able to like make use of Trickster, but otherwise, besides from that, his ability is just kind of a little bit too niche to see general main deck play. Next, we have Herdy. It is a 4-cost backup. When Herdy enters the field, you may search for 1 card named Montblanc and add it to your hand. We didn't get any new Montblancs from this set, so like pretty much we only have Montblanc from Opus 4, which is FFTA, and then Montblanc from set 2, which is like a Moogle that gain additional power for every other Moogle you control. This card is not EX burst when it needs to be EX burst. Which makes it just too narrow. And this backup inherently doesn't do anything by itself. It should have had some sort of secondary ability or should have had an EX burst. This card is just underpowered. So that's a big issue with him. Obviously, with the new Final Fantasy 13 deck and having the new Zero, having synergies with Moogles is pretty solid. That being said, there are like just better Moogles. So Herdy will not see play even in the Moogle deck, in my opinion. Next is Matthias the Corrupt. One, actually, I might actually go as far as to say the best summon of this set. It is a 1-cost summon. Choose 1 blocking forward, break it. This is very undercosted. Yeah, just very undercosted. Yeah, so there are some downsides with this card. So the one downside is that like choose 1 blocking forward. So if on resolution of this card, if the player gets rid of the attacker, it's no longer considered blocking, apparently. So yeah, if you get rid of all the attackers, so like if you get rid of like a single attacker or like the entire party, then like the blocking forward is no longer considered a blocking forward, and so this effect will fizzle out. But considering that it is only a 1-cost summon, generally your opponent's spending a lot more CP to remove all their dudes or like all their attackers, just to like stop your 1-cost Matthias. And just kill a blocking forward. That's just so strong. There's no cost restriction on it as well. Blocking is something that happens pretty often in the game, and it gives Ice a very solid way to deal with those annoying blockers in the form of Guy and now in the form of Yang. So yeah, so Matthias is super really good. It hedges up a big issue that Ice had, and it's stupidly low costed. So it's just probably the best summon of the game. Best summon of this set, definitely. Stupidly good. Barnabas. It is a 1-cost forward at 9,000 power. At the beginning of your main phase, if you don't control Lougay, dull Barnabas. When card named Lougay enters field, activate Barnabas. So, yeah, so this guy, you can't really attack with this guy unless you have Lougay to sort of Lougay on the field, because yeah, Barnabas dulls at the start of your main phase 1. So on the turn that you do play him, he's not going to dull that turn, so he can still be used as a blocker. But then when it comes back down to your turn again, then he dulls himself, so he can't attack and or defend. So yeah, so we have Lougay on the screen here. So so to sort of justify Barnabas's 1-cost 9,000 power body, Lougay is a 4-cost 5,000 power forward that does search for Lougay and has some other abilities. But yeah, Barnabas requiring Lougay on the field to like do anything after its first turn is actually a pretty big restriction. And it being Final Fantasy IV, there's not a lot of support for it right now. So right now at the stage, really, if you're using this card, it's just for funsies. It's just for fun. But yeah, otherwise this card is like not good. So like generally don't play it unless you just want to have a casual night where you can just meme up games with people. Okubo. So this is one of those cards that was spoiled early on. 2 CP. When your opponent plays the card, they discard 2 cards from their hand. Obviously it has pros and cons of if your opponent chooses the right play and like discards the entire hand, you don't get to discard you may not be able to discard 2 cards from their hand if they don't have cards from their hand. And yeah, so basically this card is like generally much better in the early game in your first 1 or 2 turns. After that, it becomes significantly more difficult to like successfully trigger off, because your opponent may be able to just commit the like rest of their cards from their like 3 or 4 card hand and just like trigger Okubo and have like 1 or 0 cards in hand, so like it loses value. Yeah, considering that Jesper's in this set, I don't really think Okubo is going to see that much play now. There just seems to be like better options to like discard your opponent's hand. So yeah, so like potentially might see like 1 copy or 2 copy at most, but like definitely I don't think you can really sort of build a strategy around it. Next we have Mystic Knight. So it is a 3-cost forward at 7,000 power. And this is something that's really cool. When Mystic Knight attacks, you may cast 1 summon from your hand. The cost required to cast it is reduced by 1. It cannot become 0. So yeah, so it's a card that allows you to discount summons. Supposedly, someone like tweeted this up. This does stack with other cost reduction abilities, like such as Una, for example. Like so, 2-cost Una that reduces your water summons by 1 cost. Mystic Knight can like cast it and then reduce it by another 1 cost. It cannot become 0 still. So yeah, so Mystic Knight actually has some pretty cool power to it. Reducing cost of summons by 1 is a pretty solid effect. Otherwise, this card doesn't really have anything going for it. If you do find some cool synergies with it, then definitely this will be like a pretty fun card to play. The thing is, a lot of ice summons generally are pretty cheaply costed so far. So unless you're playing one of the bigger ones like Glossy Allah or Hades or something, this card's not particularly too fantastic. Although if you do sort of like mix it up in terms of colors, if you like want to play it in like a ice wind standard unit deck and have arc, then it opens up some of those like cool Alexanders or Diabloses to like reduce their cost. If you mix it with ice and water, for against standard unit like Warrior Light synergy, then potentially you get to discount some of those like water summons. Having a 2-cost unit down and making your Choo Lane cost 4 to 2 is actually really good. Making your Leviathans cost 3 to 1 is actually fantastic as well. So yeah, potentially like if you want to build like a more fun ice water like summon based strategy, then this is a cool card to sort of experiment around with. And definitely like I'll try experimenting with the card and seeing what sort of fun we can have with it. Next we have Lougay. It is a 4-cost forward at 5,000 power, EX burst. When it comes into play, put Barnabas, search your deck for Barnabas and put it to your hand. And then for Ice Dull, choose 1 forward, dull it or freeze it. So secondary ability is actually fine. But yeah, you are effectively paying. So you are paying 4 CP for this card, but you're getting 2 CP back in the form of Barnabas. So you're effectively getting a 2 CP 5,000 power forward, which is, it's all right. And yeah, so like. Lougay and Barnabas are supposed to work as a pair. Obviously, you'd only play them together. You wouldn't play them without either or the other. But yeah, because Barnabas isn't particularly fantastic, Lougay kind of, there's no point to Lougay as well. So unless you're trying to meme it up, don't play Barnabas and don't play Lougay, but otherwise it'd just be kind of fun. And that's all for this video. Thank you guys for watching. What do you guys think about the new cards? Definitely let me know your feedback or comments below. What are your thoughts? What are some deck ideas you want to try out? I will be putting up some deck videos up for the new set in the near future after I get all these sort of set reviews done. Yeah, please tune in tomorrow as we talk about the next bunch of cards, the win cards from Opus 5. If you did enjoy this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. It does help with the YouTube algorithm. And otherwise, I'll catch you guys later. Grand J out.